Let me ask you something that most people are too afraid to answer honestly. Do you actually trust God? Not the version of trust that shows up on a Sunday morning when everything feels fine. Not the trust you declare in a worship song while your hands are raised. Not the trust you talk about with other believers over coffee. Do you actually trust Him with the thing that keeps you up at night? With the situation you have been carrying alone for months? With the future you are terrified to release? With the outcome you have been working so hard to control, because trusting God with it feels more dangerous than holding on to it yourself? Because here is what most believers do not know. The moment you move from halfway trust to complete trust, something shifts. Not eventually, not after you have proven yourself faithful enough. The moment. Today I want to show you 6 specific things God does the moment you fully trust Him with your life. Stay with me through all 6. Because thing number 4 is the one that will change the way you see every situation you have been trying to force into the shape you wanted. You have been carrying something heavy for a long time, and the exhausting part is not the weight of the thing itself, and the exhausting part is the constant mental effort of managing it. Planning every possible outcome, preparing for every possible failure, trying to stay one step ahead of everything that could go wrong, holding on so tightly to the result you need that your hands have stopped being open to anything else. And somewhere in the middle of all that effort, you have said the words, "God, I trust you with this." And then 5 minutes later, you were back to managing it yourself. Not because you are faithless, not because you are a bad Christian, but because complete trust is one of the hardest things a human being can practice. But because complete trust requires you to accept something that every instinct in you resists. That the outcome is not yours to control. That the timing is not yours to set. That the result may not look the way you planned. And that God is good anyway. That is not easy, but it is possible. And today I want to show you what becomes possible on the other side of it. Because the 6 things God does the moment you fully trust Him are not small things. They are life-altering things. And you have been one decision away from all of them. I am going to walk you through 6 specific things that God does the moment you release complete trust to Him. Not things that might happen eventually. Not blessings that come after years of faithfulness. Things that begin the moment the trust becomes real. After each one, I'm going to show you the most common way believers block that thing from happening, even after they say they trust God. Because knowing what God does is only half the picture. Understanding what gets in the way is what makes the difference between a declaration of trust and a life that actually looks like it. Stay with me through all 6. Thing 1. God replaces your anxiety with a peace that has no logical explanation. This is the first thing that happens, and it is the one that surprises people the most. Because most believers expect that trusting God will feel like relief, like the weight being lifted, like the problem suddenly feeling smaller. But what actually happens is stranger than that. The problem does not get smaller. The situation does not resolve overnight. The uncertainty does not disappear. But something inside you becomes still in a way that has no natural explanation. Philippians chapter 4, verse 7 calls it the peace of God that surpasses all understanding. Surpasses all understanding. That means the people around you will not be able to explain it. That means you will not always be able to explain it yourself. You are going through the same storm, but you are not sinking. You are facing the same pressure, but there is a calm at the center of it that was not there before. That is not positive thinking. That is not emotional resilience. That is God, keeping what you released to Him. Situations that used to consume your thoughts stop controlling your peace. You still see the problem clearly. You just stop being owned by it. And that shift, that internal stillness in the middle of external uncertainty, is one of the clearest signs that God received what you released to Him. Taking the worry back within hours of surrendering it. You release it to God in prayer. You feel the peace settle. And then the next thought that comes, you pick the worry back up and start carrying it again. And the peace leaves with the surrender. Philippians chapter 4, verse 6 says, "Present your requests to God." Verse 7 says, "The peace will guard your heart and mind." The peace guards what stays surrendered. The moment you take the worry back, you are telling God you changed your mind about the exchange. When anxiety returns after you have prayed, do not analyze it. Do not argue with it. Open your mouth and say it out loud. God has this. I gave it to Him. I am not taking it back. Say it until the peace returns, because it will. Thing 2. God begins moving you away from what was never meant for you and toward what was always yours. Most people experience this as loss before they experience it as gain, and that is why it is so easy to misread. The moment you fully trust God with your life, He begins to align what is around you with what He designed for you. And some of what is currently around you was never designed for you. The relationship that has been comfortable but not right. The plan that has been familiar but not God's. The version of your future you have been building with your own hands that is slightly off from the one He has been preparing. Proverbs chapter 3, verses 5 and 6 say, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to Him, and He will make your paths straight." He will make your paths straight. But a path that needs to be made straight is a path that is currently not straight. And straightening it sometimes means removing what was bending it. What felt like loss was actually correction. What felt like doors closing was actually redirection. What felt like things falling apart was actually God clearing what was in the way of what He was bringing. The pruning is real, but so is the fruit it produces, fighting the alignment instead of following it. When God begins moving things, most believers fight to keep what is shifting. They chase the relationship that is fading. They force the door that is closing. They rebuild what God is deliberately dismantling. And in doing so, they slow down or stop entirely the very alignment they asked God for when they said they trusted Him. Complete trust means trusting not just what God gives, but what He takes. The removal is part of the plan. Let it happen. Thing 3. God strengthens your faith through the very trials you asked Him to remove. This one requires honesty, because when most believers say they trust God, what they mean underneath it is this: God, I trust You to fix this quickly. God, I trust You to make this stop. God, I trust You to take this away before it costs me too much. But complete trust is not trust in a specific outcome. Complete trust is trust in a specific person. And the person you are trusting is a God who builds faith through trials, not around them. James chapter 1 verses 3 and 4 say, "The testing of your faith produces perseverance, and perseverance must finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything." Not lacking anything. That is the destination. But the road to it runs directly through the trial, not around it. Before you fully trusted God, trials shook you. They raised questions about His goodness. They made you wonder if He was paying attention. But the moment you fully trust Him, your relationship with trials changes. You stop asking only, "Why is this happening to me?" You start asking, "What is God building in me through this?" And that question changes everything. Because pain with purpose is completely different from pain without it. Every difficult season you have been through that you are still standing after, that is not coincidence. That is God building something in you that comfort never could have produced. Demanding that God explain the trial before they will trust Him through it, full trust does not require full understanding. Abraham left for a land whose name he did not yet know. He trusted the God who was calling him more than he trusted his need to understand the destination first. That is the model. You do not need to understand the trial to trust the God who is working through it. You need to trust the God who is working through it enough to stop demanding an explanation before you surrender. Thing 4. God stops you from wasting your life chasing outcomes He never ordained for you. This is the thing that changes the way you see every situation you have been trying to force. Because most of the exhaustion you have been carrying is not from the trials God placed in your path. It is from the ones you created by running ahead of Him. The relationship you forced that God never opened. The opportunity you chased that He never endorsed. The door you kicked in because you were tired of waiting for Him to open it. And the energy it took to maintain what God never built is the energy that left you with nothing left to give to what He actually called you to. Proverbs chapter 16 verse 9 says, "A person plans their course, but the Lord establishes their steps." Plans their course. Lord establishes their steps. Both are happening simultaneously. You plan, God establishes. And the moment you fully trust Him, you stop fighting that tension. You stop trying to make your plan and God's plan the same thing by sheer force of will. You start bringing your plans to Him before you execute them, instead of asking Him to bless them after. And the result is something most believers spend years trying to manufacture on their own and never quite achieve. A life that feels aligned. Not perfect, not problem-free. Aligned. Where what you are doing matches what you were made for. Where the effort you are putting out is producing fruit, instead of just producing more effort. Where the doors that are open because God opened them, and the ones that are closed because He closed them, and you have learned to tell the difference between the two. Confusing persistence with trust. There is a version of persistence that is godly. It is the persistence of continuing to pray, continuing to believe, continuing to move forward in obedience while trusting God with the outcome. And there is a version of persistence that is actually control wearing a spiritual costume. It is the persistence of refusing to accept that God might be redirecting you, refusing to hear the no in the closed door, refusing to release the plan because releasing it feels like giving up. Complete trust knows the difference between a door God is asking you to keep knocking on and a door God already closed. If you have been pushing against a closed door for months or years with no movement, no peace, and no confirmation, that is not persistence. That is control. And the moment you release it, God will show you where the open door actually is. Thing 5. God makes you more responsive to His voice than you have ever been before. This is the thing that changes your daily life more than anything else on this list. Because the distance most believers feel from God is not primarily a closeness problem. It is a hearing problem. And the thing that creates the most interference in hearing God clearly is the noise of your own plans competing with His voice. When your hands are full of your own agenda, you cannot receive what He is trying to hand you. When your mind is consumed with managing your own outcomes, you cannot hear the still small voice trying to redirect you. But the moment you fully trust Him, something shifts in your sensitivity. Isaiah chapter 30, verse 21 says, "Whether you turn to the right or to the left, your ears will hear a voice behind you saying, 'This is the way, walk in it.' This is the way, walk in it." Not maybe this is the way. Not figure it out and I will confirm it later. This is the way. But hearing that voice requires ears that are not filled with the static of self-directed plans and fear-based decisions. Complete trust quiets the internal noise enough for the signal to come through clearly. You begin recognizing His prompting in ordinary moments. A thought that arrives with unusual clarity. A scripture that lands with unexpected precision on something you have been wrestling with. A peace that settles over a decision before you have fully made it. A resistance that stops you before you step into something that looked right but was not. These are not coincidences. These are God communicating with a person whose hands are open enough to receive what he is saying, only listening for God to confirm what they have already decided. Most believers approach God's voice the way they approach a reference they are looking for in a book. They have already formed the conclusion. They are looking for the verse, the confirmation, the sign that agrees with what they already decided. And they call it seeking God's will. But seeking God's will means being genuinely open to hearing something different from what you walked in wanting to hear. It means bringing the decision to God before you have already made it in your heart. It means being willing to be redirected, corrected, or asked to wait. The believers who hear God most clearly are not the ones who pray the longest. They are the ones who listen with the least attachment to a specific answer. Bring the open hand to God, not the clenched fist. Watch how clearly He speaks into that openness. Thing 6. God begins doing things in your life that could not have happened if you had stayed in control. This is the thing that becomes your testimony. Because there are certain things God cannot do in a life that is closed to His direction. Not because He lacks the power, because He will not override the will of someone who is determined to stay in the driver's seat. But the moment you fully trust Him, you create space for Him to work in ways that go beyond what you could have planned, manufactured, or imagined. Ephesians chapter 3, verse 20 says, God is able to do immeasurably more than all we ask or imagine, according to His power that is at work within us. Immeasurably more. Not slightly more than you expected, approximately what you hoped for, immeasurably more. But that verse has a condition embedded in it that most people read past. According to His power that is at work within us. The power works within a life that is yielded to it. A life that is gripped by control limits what God can do, not because of God's limitation, but because of the space the grip leaves Him to work in. The moment you open your hands, the moment you release the outcome, the moment you stop telling God how the answer needs to arrive and simply trust that it will, you create the space for Him to move in ways that will leave you with no explanation except, God did this. Doors open at the right time. Connections appear from unexpected directions. Situations shift in ways that were not possible given the circumstances. And you begin to recognize something that changes you permanently. God's plans are not just different from yours. They are better than yours. Not because yours were wrong, because His perspective includes everything you cannot see from where you are standing. He sees the end from the beginning. He knows what is 3 chapters ahead. He knows which door leads to the life you were actually made for, and which one leads to a detour that costs you years. Trusting Him completely is not giving up. It is finally giving Him enough room to do what He came to do. Trusting God with the big things while controlling the small ones. Complete trust is not selective. Most believers reach a point where they genuinely release the major things to God. The career, the marriage, the health situation, the big decision. And then they maintain tight control over the daily details, the conversations, the small decisions, the mundane moments that seem too insignificant to bring to God. But God is not interested in managing your life at the macro level while you handle the micro. He is interested in all of it. Because the small daily decisions are not separate from the big outcomes. They are the foundation the big outcomes are built on. Trust Him with the details. Ask Him about the small decisions. Bring the ordinary moments to Him the same way you bring the extraordinary ones. Because the immeasurably more He promised is built through the accumulation of small surrenders, not just the dramatic ones. Here is what I need you to hold before we close. You have been thinking about trust as something you either have or you do not. But trust is not a feeling. Trust is a daily decision. And like every daily decision, it gets easier the more consistently you make it. The first time you release something completely to God, it will feel dangerous. The second time, slightly less so. The 100th time, you will wonder why you ever held on so tightly to begin with. Because here is what complete trust actually produces over time. Not a perfect life, not a life without trials, not a life where every prayer gets answered the way you hoped, but a life that is grounded in something that circumstances cannot shake, a peace that makes no sense, a direction that is clearer than anything you manufactured on your own, a faith that is stronger because it has been tested and has held, a freedom from fear that used to control every decision you made, an ability to hear God that grows sharper the more you practice listening, and a testimony that could only have been written by a God who does immeasurably more than you could have done yourself. 6 things, all of them available, all of them beginning the moment the trust becomes complete. Psalm 37 verse 5 says, "Commit your way to the Lord, trust in Him, and He will act." He will act. Not He might act. Not He will act if you are faithful enough, or patient enough, or spiritual enough. He will act. That is a promise from a God who has never broken one. But the promise is conditional on one thing. Commit your way to the Lord. Not most of your way. Not the parts that feel safe to release. Not the plans where you are comfortable with any outcome. Your way. All of it. The thing you have been holding back. The outcome you have been afraid to release. The version of your future you have been gripping because releasing it feels like giving up on everything you have worked for. That is the thing He is asking for. And the moment you open your hand and give it to Him, He begins doing the 6 things I just walked you through. Not eventually. Not after you prove yourself ready. The moment. Before you go, I want to ask you one honest question. Of these 6 things, which one do you most desperately need God to do in your life right now? Drop just the number in the comments. You do not have to explain anything. Just name it. Because naming what you need is the first step toward releasing what you have been holding on to in its place. Share this with someone who has been saying they trust God, but is still carrying the weight of someone who is managing everything themselves. They may need to hear that there is a different way to live, and it starts with one decision. Subscribe so we can keep building this together, one truth at a time. God is waiting for the moment you fully trust Him. Give Him that moment today.